Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to check out a video by the Critical Drinker called Animal Farm. This was probably a bad idea. I decided to check this one out because I am actually interested in Western animation. I went to school for Western animation and I'm glad I never actually ended up becoming an animator in the West. And this video will probably explain a little bit why. Let's check it out.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this.
I parked the car! Let's have no one do that again.
Animal Farm.
They like to stick in jokes that are like, oh, the kids will think this is super funny. But I'm not a fan of try-hard comedy. I like things that flow really well. Oh, look, I threw a car in the pool. Isn't that funny, guys? Come on, laugh. You're children, right? This is funny.
Let's discuss the concept of death of the author, shall we, dear viewer? Based on the 1960s essay by the French literary critic Roland Barthes, it suggests that when it comes to assessing a piece of media, the original intent and ideas of the creator are less relevant than the individual perceptions and experiences of the audience.
The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. Boy, doesn't that just hit localization on the head?
Alright, guy.
Basically, it doesn't matter what the creator of the work tried to say with it. Once it's released into the world, all that really matters is what you personally take from it.
It's really funny because people do this all the time. Like, they'll write a story about like anti-religion, or they'll write a story about like how global warming is like real and takes over the world, and then their message is just completely flipped on the head. Like, there's a lot of people who take the villain side, or they'll take the, oh, but this is actually a Christian story. And it's really funny because you think, oh, I'm gonna make it like super obvious that I'm anti-religion or I'm anti-global warming, and then people who have the ideas the opposite of you are like, well, this is a story saying why this isn't real or why this is actually good.
That doesn't make sense.
And by golly, I do believe that Andy Serkis is pushing that concept to its limits with his very unique take on Animal Farm, which, reimagines George Orwell's satirical critique of totalitarian communism and Stalin's cult of personality as a wacky contemporary animated comedy starring Seth Rogen, where the real enemy is a tech billionaire who happens to drive a Cybertruck.
Right.
You know, I can't be 100% sure with this one, but I'm pretty confident we live in the worst timeline imaginable.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's literally just because of these people who want to impose their narrative on everything. And it's really interesting because that's not how the world works, but I guess I do understand it to some extent because, like I said, you could write anything and you're going to see it the way that you see it, just based on, it could just be because they have a narrow worldview. They live in their little echo chambers and they just don't go outside of it. And I find that actually very interesting now that I think about it, because yeah, if you only know one thing, like melons, I recently just ran into somebody who was like, who ate a melon and they called it a cantaloupe, and it was a papaya. And I thought it was really interesting because it was like, well, yeah, they don't really have a frame of reference outside of cantaloupe, so they called it a cantaloupe. I thought that was really interesting, and maybe that's kind of where they're coming from. It's like, oh, this is just like this thing that I like, so I'm gonna call it this thing that I like, but it's not. It's weird.
Look, I'm not against the concept of adapting classic stories to fit with contemporary events, as long as they stay true to the original themes and ideas. Like Apocalypse Now took Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness, which was originally set in 19th century Africa, and transplanted it into 1960s Vietnam. It worked in that case because both stories dealt with the same basic ideas: the dehumanizing and corrupting nature of power, the loss of morality when the civilization that underpins it vanishes, the dangers of imperialism and colonialism.
I don't know. I did read Animal Farm and I do like animation. This is why I wanted to talk about this, but I don't know anything about this. Sorry, guys.
But what happens when you specifically set out to change the very core of the story to deliver a completely different message than the one intended by the author? Well, you end up with Animal Farm, I guess. But why does it really matter? Well, it matters because Animal Farm just so happens to be one of the most iconic and widely referenced political satires ever written, a scathing critique of totalitarian communism and Stalin's cult of personality, and a pretty biting observation about human nature, our greed, our lust for power, and our willingness to compromise our moral principles for personal gain.
All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Boy, that sums up a lot of people nowadays, doesn't it? Like, oh, we're all equal, but I deserve more than you. Well, even when it comes to localization, like, oh, the West should have only what we just deem equal. Like, this anime needs to be equal to all the other animations in the West. So we're going to put our spin on it.
Again. In short, it's not really the sort of thing that lends itself to a goofy Seth Rogen kids comedy whose main message seems to be rich people bad. Maybe you should lead by example.
It's really funny because Marxism was started by a really rich person.
Seth, and donate all that money you've got in the bank. Now, you might find this hard to believe nowadays, but once upon a time, I actually used to read books, and George Orwell's works made quite the impression on teenage me, so I have to admit I do have a certain attachment to Animal Farm.
Yeah, I've read Animal Farm too. It's really good. You should check it out.
The original novella roughly follows the events of the Russian Revolution and the eventual rise of Stalin as sole dictator. The animals of Manor Farm stage a rebellion against their corrupt and incompetent human overlords, i.e. the Russian aristocracy, and usher in a new society based on the promise of equality and freedom for all, as imagined by Old Major, basically a combination of Marx and Lenin, who dies before he can see his dream accomplished. In the power vacuum that follows, a pair of pigs, Napoleon and Snowball, Stalin and Trotsky, fight for control of the farm until Snowball eventually gets pushed out and exiled and Napoleon becomes the supreme leader.
Yeah, because they had control of the dogs. When Major was in charge, they took the puppies and they raised them so that they could be basically their police.
The more time that passes, the more his rule devolves into a dictatorship as he purges the farm of his enemies, real or imagined, and keeps the population in perpetual fear and poverty, despite assuring them that they're better off than they were before. Eventually, he and the other pigs become so human in their behavior that they end up negotiating and trading with actual humans from other farms, walking around on two legs and hosting lavish parties while the rest of the animals watch from outside.
Yep. And that's where you become more animals are equal than others. You gain so much notoriety that you end up just ignoring where your roots came from. But that's not necessarily what communism is about. But yeah, that's what the book is about, is you forget where you came from. You ignore those roots and you're just like, well, now I'm up here. I have the power. I have the control. Why do I care about anybody that's not up here? That's why the localizers and everybody else, they want to make sure that you have their same thinking, and they want to make sure you all a hive mind, because if they obviously need more people. Like, they can't operate with just their small little group, so they let people in. But those people that they let in, they have to think exactly like them. They have to do what they do. They have to localize the way they want to localize. So they're not going to let people, like, just anybody in, which it should be based on talent. It should not be based on politics or message or what you're willing to put out there. And they don't see it that way. It's a threat.
With all their greed and their lies and their lust for power, they've become the very thing they swore to overthrow. No matter how noble your intentions and no matter how much you might promise freedom and equality, a new class of rulers and aristocrats is always going to rise up.
Yeah, and that's the problem. You can't guarantee that the future is going to be what you planned. Like, it's with anything. I mean, you can base it off of, like, kings. Like, say you overthrow a kingdom and you become a king and then you have kids. That doesn't necessarily mean that those kids are going to rule like you did. I mean, you could try your best to push them in that direction, but that doesn't mean that they're going to rule that way. Or you can start a studio within the intention of, hey, we're not going to localize things, but one bad actor gets in there. They're like, pretend or whatever, and then they somehow get in charge of everything, and boom, your whole company is now exactly the opposite of what you wanted to do. Hey, Angel Studios, I thought you were trying to be the opposite of everybody else, and now you let Animal Farm in. Coincidence? Weird? Maybe think about that.
Just with different names. The cycle of revolution, corruption, and exploitation keeps repeating because fundamentally, humans are not equal and you can't force them to be. There's always going to be some arsehole who wants more. More money, more resources, more power. And he's willing to break, exploit, or just straight up rewrite the rules to get what he wants. It's all very interesting stuff. The obvious problem these days, though, is twofold. One, the satire is kind of lost because most people now don't even have a functioning understanding of what the Russian Revolution was, never mind the finer details, the timeline of events, or the major players involved.
I think that's okay though, because I never read it from that perspective. I just read it from the modern day perspective, and you still get the sense of like what is the message. It's not necessarily the message of Stalin and the Russian Revolution stuff. Like that might not come to your brain, but you could compare a lot of it to the modern day, because there's a lot of things that happen within communities that happen to be pretty much like this. Like you can see it like with games and animation and like manga translation, like localization. You can see it, especially if you've been in the fandom for so long. Like we started out with the good intentions of like major, like the fans used to sit down and actually sub it out with, because they wanted to watch it and they wanted to share their love of animation and anime with their other fans. They wanted other people to watch it, and they understood the language so they could share it with other people. These localizers now, they don't want to share what they saw. They want to share what they want you to see.
And 2, the idea of a Hollywood movie that suggests there might be a few problems with this whole socialism thing is a bit like striding into the Vatican in rainbow-coloured underwear and saying, hey chaps, this whole religion thing's a bit silly, isn't it? And the thing I can't help but wondering is, why? Animal Farm isn't the framework to do it in. Fundamentally, you're trying to tell the wrong story in the wrong setting, and it would have been way easier, and probably less intellectually offensive, to just come up with a whole new narrative that better suits your objectives.
But they're trying to take over IPs. They don't know how to create, they only can destroy. It never works, but for some reason they keep doing it.
In short, I think that remaking Animal Farm for modern audiences might have been a bad idea. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
The people that decide that they don't want to keep things the way that they should be, they actually are taking away something, like an escape. And actually, now that I think about it, because a lot of people do use this stuff as an escape, and you're taking that away from them, you could actually be hurting a lot of people. Thank you for checking out my video. Have a good day. See you in the next one. Remember to subscribe if you haven't. Thank you. Bye.